You see, and how many of us have been told that if people don't believe exactly the way that we do, that somehow they're going to hell in a handbasket? We could have hands flying up left, right, and center this morning about the reality of the way in which we have been taught. And then if you layer that with people who perhaps come from a Jewish perspective, or folks who come from a Muslim perspective, or from a Hindu perspective, or from Unitarian Universalist perspective. I see Reverend Bob at the back there. But those who come from different traditions, different faiths, and we ask ourselves, how do we bring these people together in dialogue? I want to tell you a story of my own life, and some of you will know this, that I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons as they have been referred to. Now, I was out of the Mormon church by the time I was about 9 or 10 years old, so whilst I have vivid memories of the Mormon church, of course, I was able to shed some of the theology that many Mormons are unable to shed. So I'm not one of those damaged children, but from my early faith experience, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you this morning. But I have vivid memories of the Mormon church and sharing in that community. My parents left the Mormon church at the same time, and they consider themselves now Christians through the Metropolitan Community Church, and so I'm delighted they're a part of this faith tradition. But I grew up knowing that the Mormon church was the only way. And that the reality was that all of these other churches, all of these other Christian churches or other faiths were somehow not able to get into the heaven that we would be able to get into. In fact, one of my mother's biggest fears, and she still has it right the way through to today, even though she's no longer a Mormon, even though she's a part of this community whenever she can be, but one of her greatest fears is the indoctrination that she got from a Mormon was that she and I would not be in the same heaven when we finally get to eternal rest. And she's always lived with that. We talk about that often on the phone about how because Mormons believe that there are different heavens. And of course, Mormons only get into the celestial heaven. That's the top place. It's the place where nobody else gets to unless you're a signed up tithing member of the Mormon church. Remember, it's a signed-up tithing member of the Mormon church. A quick aside to that story, I remember always at the end of the year, all of our family members would have to meet with the bishop, and in the United Kingdom, I think you have a W-2 here, is that right? It's the end-of-year statement telling you what you earned for the year, and our family would have to go in and take in our W-2s. That's not what we call them in the United Kingdom, but it's good enough for here. We'd have to take our W-2s in, and the Mormon church, the bishop would sit with us and figure out how much we'd given during the year, and if we hadn't given the full 10%, we would get a bill. So I'm glad we don't do that here, but Walter has been thinking about introducing that as a doctrine to our church. So my mother always has this fear. You see, indoctrination really filters into us. How many of us have struggled with a piece of the indoctrination that we have received when we were growing up or from a child? Some of us as LGBTQIA, BC people of faith have realized over and over again that we still struggle with pieces of that indoctrination. It's like we've got these little tapes that go on in the back of our head, and every now and again something triggers that statement. Something happens that triggers what's going on for us. And we struggle sometimes. You see, it's not just about other faiths, it's about how we as a Christian community have understood and sometimes misinterpreted the Jesus that we believe in. I want to tell you there is something blessed about sitting with people from other faith traditions, and something blessed about how we grow together. Not saying that we have to embrace each other's faiths, but there is something powerful that happens when we come together in the name of God, in the name of the one God that we are all seeking and that we are all serving. Well, growing up a Mormon, I get back to my story now. Growing up as a Mormon, you were wondering whether I was ever going to finish this, weren't you? But growing up as a Mormon, I was taught that, of course, Mormons were the only ones who were getting into heaven. And then when I came into Metropolitan Community Church, it was a bit of an adjustment to kind of come to a newer understanding of who God is, how big and wide and deep and tall and grand this God is. And that often my language even limited the presence of God in my own life. And so it was a real difficult sometimes for me to, so every now and again I would kind of butt up against something because I was taught that, everybody needed to be a Christian. And that my job was to go out into the world and convert everybody for Jesus. In our evangelical language, we would, cover people in the blood of the Lamb. Oh, I used it, blood language. But that was the language. That was how I was taught, even within the Mormon tradition. That was what I was taught. And then you go off to seminary. Now Brad and Megan will know this one. You go to seminary, and I tell you, the first year of seminary is a breakdown of everything you've ever believed in the whole of your lives. Now thankfully year 2 is about building that back up, or year 2 and year 3. But the reality is that seminary has been a place where people of liberation and of public thought and liberal arts come together to discover who God is. Well, my seminary was an evangelical Anglican school, so I didn't get that experience. I got it reinforced that Christianity was the way, the truth, and the life, and I truly believe that. I want you to hear that from me this morning. I truly believe that for me, Christianity is the way, the truth, and the life. I truly believe that in my experience. But I spent the first few years of my ministry within MCC pretty evangelical. Now you might not believe that now looking at me all these years later, but I was pretty evangelical. And just shortly after I was ordained, 20 odd years ago, the AIDS pandemic struck. And some of my early ministry memories are about burying men and women and young men specifically who were dying of AIDS. And of course, most of these young men didn't have any faith whatsoever. Remember, I'm from Great Britain, where the chosen frozen. Nobody believes in God in Europe anymore. And so many of these young men didn't have a faith. Or if they did have a faith, it was a faith that was perhaps a little different from mine. And I remember being a chaplain and being with those young men and having to really put aside my own faith in order to really minister to these folks. And I know that we have some chaplains in the room this morning, and you'll hopefully identify with that it is about putting aside our own faith traditions in order to be really present with people. Well, when I was able to put myself aside and really be present with people, I heard stories of faith